Hi everyone, delonewolf here and welcome back to EVE Talk, your weekly look at the market in EVE Online. Last week, well, we did get a patch in EVE Online last week which had the new asteroid effect when they deplete, but other than that it's mostly been a massive patch note of fixes, bug fixes, problems solved, and then some small little changes that are useful here and there, but nothing too major, nothing too new. I actually think that most players love when CCP does one of these patches. It feels more like a maintenance and a preparation patch. So personally, I am eagerly awaiting what CCP is working on for their next development phase for EVE Online. I'm curious to see if it's still going to be like propaganda towers and things like that. And from EVE updates we do know that something that they are working on is of course a 64-bit client, which is not like lots of new content for the game, but I think has lots of potential to improve the game longer term. So we'll keep a close eye on that, and of course we'll keep a close eye on any announcements from CCP. Next up, we'll take a quick look at the New Eden store, and oh man, Ishtar police skin, Vexor police skin, and look at that Nyx police skin. That looks absolutely amazing. Yeah, 390 plex. It's a decent amount, but it doesn't feel completely crazy. Also the Ishtar plex 110, Ishtar skin, sorry, 110 plex. That really doesn't feel out of line. That's something that I might do. Just look at how great that looks. Galente police department. I'm assuming this is what this is for here. The lights up there, and then at the front as well, you've got like the forward-facing searchlights that are like, hey, we are here to dispense justice. So definitely one that I need for the Ishtar, because it's so much fun exploring in that. You're always going up against pirates, and so that just absolutely fits right there. Really awesome looking skins. Other than that, the fireworks are no longer at the very top. We still have these lava core skins, which I think also look quite amazing, and we get the Angel Hex bundle. If you're looking for some really cool skins, just open up the New Eden store. It does look like we've got some very nice one on the front page right now. And then next we are going to dive into the market itself. Let's go like that, and we'll do plex and stuff at first, of course, starting out at 235. Like that, and you may already have been able to see it from the ticker. 3.6 million ISK in JITA for the sellers of plex. That is up quite substantially, and if we look at the price history, we have a 1-year high point here, and it hasn't even registered just yet what's happening in JITA itself. So I'm really curious to see what's happening in the player-owned trade hubs. Those are still selling for 3,400,000 ISK, pretty close to that. Buyers at just above 3.3 million. So that is very weird. Lots of demand all of a sudden in JITA. I'm curious to see if people are going to start seeding JITA itself, because there must be sales happening there in order to produce this result, in order to get a better price for the plex, or if they're just going to start to jack up the prices in the player-owned trade hubs. But that is a massive difference between the sellers in the trade hubs, in the player trade hubs, and in JITA 4.4 itself. 3.4 million, a bit less than that, to 3.6 million ISK for the sellers. I do think that we are primed for a further increase in price if we look at JITA 4.4 here as basically something that is bound to precede what is going to happen in the player-owned trade hubs then. So here I think we are set to go up, and yeah, these data points, I mean, we've got median daily prices of over 3.4 million. Here it's still at just below 3.4 million. But I think that we are primed to go for 1-year high, and a 1-year high in the 5-day moving average. That one has been reached on this chart. The multiple pilot training certificate also climbing to a 1-year high. Bit of stalling at the tail end, but it's at 1.5 billion ISK for the sellers, 1.4 billion for the buyers, and in JITA we are at 1.55 billion pretty much for the sellers there. So very expensive as well. 1-year high point, a great time to sell if of course you bought throughout the year for less than $1 billion ISK. You had several opportunities to do so. Now 50% profit, very nice and very easy trade. And yeah, the patience that you must have had here through April when we had these massive sales from the trading certificates, and in the summer as well, that is now the time where you can get your payoff, because we of course have reached that 1 year high point as well. Skill extractors next, flattening out, but at a 1 year high point for the 5-day moving average as well, which if this chart is any indication, then plex might stall, and then it might just be that it's not JITA 4.4 in plex that is deciding what's happening, but that it's actually the player own trade hubs that are more on the ball. That's a possible explanation as well. So that's a bit of a gamble that you have to take. Personally, I do think we still have a little bit of upwards momentum for plex, but I might be wrong on that. So for the skill extractors, it's pretty obvious that we are flattening out. These are selling for 390 million ISK bars, coming in at 373. Not that much of a margin, a bit more reasonable. Let's take a quick look at JITA. Oh, sorry, that's JITA, 390 million ISK, and in the player-owned trade hubs, it's 383 million ISK. So that's a much smaller margin between sellers and buyers there. It still makes the plex difference seem very weird. Next up, we have the large skill injectors. After reaching a 1 year high point of more than 850 million ISK, have to give a little bit of ground back, but we are now stabilizing at 830, which is still definitely pretty damn high. In fact, the sellers are at 852 million and the buyers coming in at 800 million. That's a pretty wide margin. The market still doesn't really know what to do with itself, I think, when it comes to the large skill injectors. We had this temporary massive boost in demand, of course, because of the Christmas gifts, and now the market needs to decide a little bit how low or how high the large scale injectors are going to stay. Next up, we have the small scale injectors. Those are definitely staying at a pretty high point of more than 170 million ISK here. A bit of upwards momentum even at the tail end, selling now for 171 million ISK, 180 almost in JITA, and 166 for the buyers. Very narrow margin here between buyers and sellers as well, so I don't think we have a lot of room to go down. Whereas the large scale injectors, well, that's still a decent margin, 850 million to 800 million. Here we could still decide on a lower price than what we're seeing today. And then finally, we have the daily alpha injectors that have been crawling out of the hole of a CCP sale as well. So you could have bought these for 35 million ISK. Now they're selling for almost 50 million ISK, and the buyers are coming in at 47.3. So again, super narrow margin on the upswing here for the price. But I personally think that this is still too early, because we're still definitely way below average at around 50 million ISK here. If you look then at what happened with the multiple buy trading certificates, we reached these points as well after dipping below $1 billion, and all of those look like you might make a quick trade if you want to, but patience is really what is going to be paying off. Although also, of course, the volumes are always something to keep in mind. If you have hundreds of multiple pilot trading certificates, you are going to have a tough time selling them 1 to 6 at a time. And here for the daily alpha injectors, well, we are talking how many here? Couple hundred a day, sellers coming in at, well, maybe a dozen or so, which I think should give you a bit of an indication on how much you can invest in. And if you have too much, of course, then I wouldn't blame you to take a profit if you bought at 35 million at this point. Next up, we are moving on to the minerals at 835. I'm also doing like transparent chat above, just trying to see if that added animation there is cool or if it's annoying. Let me know about that in the comments if you'd rather see these unpinned and so not transparent, or if you think that it's okay to keep it transparent as long as it's only these chat windows and not the market. I think that that needs to be as clear as possible. But let's move on to those minerals, and here we go for titanium. Very flat above 4.5, so really trying to hold on. Selling now for, we should definitely grab JITA here, 469, almost 4.7 ISK for the sellers and 455 for the buyers. Buyers, at least a couple of them, forced above 4.5 ISK is a good indication that we're here for the foreseeable future here. that the market is not willing to go below 4.5 ISK for titanium. And as I've said in the previous video on titanium, my viewpoint on what's happening in the mineral market has changed a little bit. So pyrite now being at 364, that's a price below titanium, always felt crazy, like pyrite is super cheap or something like that, and too available. But no, it's I think something completely different. Titanium is so bulky, so difficult to move, that you're basically still paying a premium for that mineral no matter what, because it is so difficult to actually move it around once it has the form of titanium itself. And so as a result here, this 469 and the fact that we're actually at a 1-year low point really does indicate that we are in a massive oversupply in general, because even the price of titanium is depressed despite the fact that it's so immobile compared to the other minerals. And so pyrite that is crawling out of the hole, and titanium that is not doing so, is a bit of a weird position to be in. But pyrite is now also basically flat for the last 4 months or so. Titanium, same thing here, last 3 months pretty much flat. And so we are basically at a less than average price, a pretty bad price, and obviously an oversupplied situation, but it looks like it's not escalating too much anymore in the last couple of months. So that is pretty interesting. Pyrite is currently selling for 364, buyers coming in at 354. You do still have the 1.1 billion units, 700 million units, the massive volumes coming in, because these are massively oversupplied, but it puts everything in a little bit of a different perspective here when it comes to actually using titanium, when I'm now doing a little bit of industry as well, and I'm already really bouncing into the fact that I need to buy way more titanium than the other minerals, and bringing it from a trade hub to the place of production is actually a pain in the butt if you don't go for the compressed ores themselves, and then of course have the ability to refine where you produce, which is not always the case either. So very interesting situation here, and I think that basically pyrite, isogen, things like that are the real indicators of oversupply in general, and titanium always has that premium, and should be something that is very difficult to break just by adding new supply. So pyrite is doing okay, a little bit of a comeback back at the 4-month prices. Isogen is actually slowly going back up, and same thing here, getting to that same level of around mid-October, and selling for 1728, 1647 for the buyers. You know, at least it's not below 15 ISK, which we've been there in November. So here, slight and steady comeback, which is ending here at the tail end. I'm seeing this flattening out a little bit, but yeah, at least the situation does seem to be stabilizing. Next up, we have Noxium, also stable at around 300 ISK. Unfortunately, we are dipping below that, so here we are seeing a little bit of pressure. 303 ISK for the sellers and 288 ISK for the buyers. That's not a lot, and I think that there is enough upward pressure to put us in the 275 to 300 range, to be honest, but that would still be in line with what we're seeing with isogen, with what we're seeing with pyrite. Finally, a bit of stabilization, but of course at a less than average price, because at the moment demand just isn't there. Next up, we have Zydrine. Let's take a look at that after a little bit of a bump up to 600 ISK, which was in fact a price range that we hadn't seen since before the summer, since late June. We have to give back a little bit of ground. Are we staying above 500? 542 for the sellers, 521 for the buyers. Not a great price historically speaking, but considering the last half year or so, this is actually a reasonable price. So same story here basically. We do have that constant oversupply, the market that is constantly saying there's too much ore, there's too many minerals, we're not destroying enough. And here at the tail end, we finally have a little bit of a resurgence and then a stabilization at a price that we haven't seen in several months. I would say that that in general is actually good news. Megasite, same story right here, stable now at the same price that we had August, September throughout the summer on this one. So 570 for the sellers and 545 for the buyers. So yeah, looks like just before the December, that is where you could have bought at like 378. You've got a little bit of a trade that could have been made there. It always felt super risky, of course, because of just the massive downtrend for practically 1 year straight. But now that slight comeback. That stabilization is really the way I would describe it of the mineral market seems to be here. And then finally we also have more fight. That is, well, same picture again. Well, no, actually this is actually different. This is 1 year low point, less than 8,000 ISK. It's flat for the last 2 months or so, but it is nowhere near the levels that we had through the summer or anything like that. So you can see that more fight is something quite unique. Sellers for less than 8,000 ISK, buyers at 7,644 ISK, super cheap, 1 year low prices. If you're still looking for that mineral investment, then more fight would be the ticket. The other ones, well, you're there, I think, on a price range that the market has decided on. Next up, we have PI coming in at 1510. Like that, and well, we're actually doing okay. I'm not sure if I mentioned it, but a couple of houses away from us, they're doing some construction work. So if all of a sudden you're hearing drilling sounds and things like that in the background, not much I can do about it. I apologize beforehand, but so far it felt like it's doing okay. So we're going to continue on our elan, and here we go. Broadcast nodes back to the average price of around 2.1 million. I wrote down a timestamp. Yes, 2,086,000 for the sellers and less than 2 million still for the buyers though. So it's really the buyers that are not willing to budge at all. They want their cheap advanced planetary materials. But from time to time, impatient people do buy up the sell orders up to a higher price point, up to 2.1 million in this case, which is around average for broadcast nodes. Construction blocks, we saw that it did dip occasionally to less than 10,000 ISK. Now it came back just a little bit. 11,000 for the sellers, 10,600 for the buyers. That's actually a naturally or an unusually small margin for construction blocks here. So back to, well, still a less than average price. I would say 12,000 was the average up to the summer. After that, we've had this dip here, and not much has moved since then. You do have occasional buy opportunities here. I personally would wait for an actual breakout before I would sell the construction blocks that I have bought. Consumer electronics is in the same position. Up through the summer, an average 14,000 ISK was doable. After that, we dipped to 12 to 13,000 ISK, and at the tail end here we had a buy opportunity, which, if I'm not mistaken, I bought some of these. Consumer electronics, yeah, I bought some of these for 10,700, so below 11,000 ISK. A little bit of a comeback at the tail end on increased volumes, but we are selling for 12,700 ISK, which is well below average, and 11,750 is one buy order. After that, we're below 11,000 back again for the buyers. So this is very tiny little uptick here, and it could go back down very quickly back to those less than average prices. But your investments, you can make these, I think. Just wait for the exact right time when you're seeing the sharp drop off like that, well below average, even on the 5-day moving average. That's when I try to put up a nice aggressive buy order, try to grab some good of minerals at a very cheap price. And now I personally think that, just like with the multiple pilot training certificate, I think that patience is going to pay off. Wait for that breakout, try to sell 15, 16k. That would be a pretty nice trade to make. Coolants, fuel related, that these guys are actually the winners of the moment. Look at that, yet again managing to get to 12,000 ISK. There was a bit of hesitation last week, but now, nope, coolants is back. 12,300, almost 12,200 for the sellers, 11,500 for the buyers. That's a great price. If you're looking to produce for ISK in the PI market right now, look into coolants. Very easy to make on Gas Planet, super available, and yeah, you're definitely getting the 1 year high price still for coolants. A 1 year rise now, basically straight up here. Very nice to see, of course. Enriched uranium, bit of hesitation, right? We're seeing some more volatility at the tail end, but look at where we're ending the week, apparently at around 14,000 ISK, 13,900 for the sellers, 13,700 for the buyers. Super narrow margin at a great price for enriched uranium as well. Bit more tricky to make, but a bit better in price. The integrity response drones are staying below average at this point, I would say. We'd need to get close to 2.5 million. Sellers are at 2.4, buyers are at 2.3, so here basically a less than average price. The mechanical parts, yeah, bit of a break down here in the price. We did so well to reach 11 to 12,000 ISK from the summer up until January, but here finally we are getting back down a little bit. I would still call this an above average price as long as you're above 10,000 ISK by a decent margin. We're doing okay. 11,000 for the sellers, 10,275 for the buyers, but you're basically starting to see the lack of demand here. The buyers, there's not that many of them. Supply in the last 24 hours almost is full front page. Basically, this is a bit of oversupply for the market at the moment that is causing trouble for the price of mechanical parts. I think if you look at the trend in general, you gotta be a little bit careful as well. For coolants, it might happen at any time. Where are the buyers at? They're still here, but once this starts to dry up a little bit, we might get in the same pattern. That is personally my expectation. You cannot hold on to one-year high prices forever, and at some point we are going to see, even for the fuel-related PI materials, that drawback, which, well, it does seem to me at least in the last couple of months that we've had this difference between the fuel-related PI materials being the winners, and as a result, I guess less ISK flowing into the others, and so those guys are not doing great after the summer. And so here, if that theory holds up, once we see all of them get back to average prices, perhaps below average prices, start looking for sell opportunities in the other goods. Nuclear reactors stable at above 90k, but not by much. If you look at the tail end here, sellers at 98,000, buyers at 92,000, and here again we are seeing a lack of buyers causing trouble for the price. I'm waiting for a real breakout here as well. Organic mortar applicators, look at that 5-day moving average, go straight through its 1.1 million average, heading for a million. That's not great for the sellers. They're still just below 1.1 million, but the buyers are only willing to pay 1 million ISK for organic mortar applicators, and you're definitely grabbing them below average right now. Robotics next, fuel related, trying to get back to 100,000 ISK a couple of times, but it is basically 95 to 100,000 ISK at the moment. 97,000 ISK for the sellers, 93.5 for the buyers. I would call that maybe even a slightly below average price, but in general this is going to be 97k right here, very close to the average price for robotics here. Self-harmonizing power cores tries to get back to 2.1, tries to get back to that average on the sellers. Yep, 2.1 million, 2 million for the buyers. Those guys though are not budging by much again. Superconductors, bit of volatility here. We are now ending at a bit less than 13k on the chart. 13,000 for the sellers, 12,400 for the buyers. Buyers are, well, both of them are just a touch above average, but not by too much. 13 to 14,000, there we get a great price. If we did below 12,000 ISK, that's when we're below average. So here, a touch above that, still a good time to sell if you need to. Test cultures are finally recovering from a price of less than 8,000 ISK. They're now at 9,400 for the sellers and 8,800 for buyers. Still a decent margin. The average of around 9,000. I think we are around average for test cultures as well. And finally, the wetware mainframes. Ooh, that's a pretty massive drop-off. Median daily price at 2.1 million. 2.2 for the sellers, 2.1 for the buyers. So here, advanced PI materials, well, you're grabbing them on the cheap if you want to start on that investment for potentially the propaganda towers. Now, I've heard suspiciously little about them, and they've also, I think, been removed from the updates website. So, in my opinion, it is a pretty big gamble to take. Eventually, I do believe that CCP wants to do them, but perhaps they have something else on the roadmap right now. So it might be a bit of a gamble, but if you want to take that gamble, yeah, obviously, try to put up those buy orders. They're very aggressive, very low in price in general. Even broadcast notes, look at that, below 2 million. They're just, you know, we want to be below the entire chart pretty much. That's what they want to do. This is the time to be stocking up on these. Try to grab a couple and be ready for a CCP announcement of another set of structures, of big structures that could increase demand all of a sudden. But yeah, it feels like a little bit of a gamble to take right now. Next up, we have advanced moon materials coming in at 23.55. Right, like that, back on the average time as well. Advanced moon materials, let's start with the carbonites. Here is Crystalline carbonite, again flat at that price, that is not near the bottoms and not high enough in my opinion to make too much of a move or a splash. Crystalline carbonite selling for 169, buyers at 145. That's just no, we're too much in the middle. Ferrite carbide, after reaching the 150 mark again, bit of a volume increase and the price is back. So your buy opportunity is over. 174 for the sellers, 143 for the buyers. There's still not a lot of buyers. You're still buying for less than 150, but I think it's going to be tricky to grab that with the sellers here upping the price all of a sudden. So nobody or very few people will be willing to sell at that price. Next up we have titanium carbide, that again is staying at around 200 ISK, so a bit above that, a bit below that. You had a small sell opportunity if you were willing to sell for more than 200 ISK, but 197 now for the sellers, 180 for the buyers. We're nowhere near a nice buy opportunity. And then tungsten carbide is also moving its way back down to 200 ISK, which is, well, maybe a it's definitely a below average price. It's not the bottom either, so you need to be below 170 for that, or 175. 209 for the sellers and 205 for the buyers. Yeah, the story here for the carbide related items is definitely one of below average prices, but nowhere near the bottom. Very tricky to be actively trading in that at the moment, I think. Next up, we've got the metamaterials. Photonic metamaterials is, well, below 17.5 thousand ISK. Unfortunately, here in March, 15k would be my trigger. 70,000 for the sellers, 16,153 for the buyers. I mean, you are definitely grabbing some pretty cheap ones here. At close to 16,000 ISK, but personally, if this has any more momentum, I would have the patience to wait for like another bottom close to 15,000 ISK. See buyers below that, that's where I would make my move personally. The plasmonic metamaterials did get pretty close to that 17.5k bottom here, a bit of a resurgence in the price, so if you were looking to buy, you're a bit late now. 21,000 for the sellers, 20,000 for the buyers. Next up, we have the non-linear metamaterials, also under pressure. But look at that, I want to see less than 20k on the buyers. It's still at almost 22,000 and 23,000 for the sellers. So that again, it's obviously under pressure. And if you would be investing here, I would not blame you at all. It is very much possible, because it is the lowest price in like the last 10 months, that this is the right time to strike. But for me personally, the market has gone lower than that before, and I do think it might still happen. And then we have terahertz metamaterials, also under pressure, back to 22,500, obviously below average, but nowhere near the bottom yet. And then for the other advanced move materials, let's go over these. Fermionic condensates, second step back to 95,000 ISK, which is still not a great price, but obviously not buying that either. 93,000 for the sellers, 91,000 for the buyers. I'd say we're again below average, but nowhere near the bottom. Ferrogel stabilizing at 45,000. Again here 40k the bottom. The average, I have to put that around 50k or even higher. If you look at the entire 1 year charts, it's the same situation. Fullerenes back up to above 1100 ISK. Look at the peaks up to 1500, so 1144. Yeah, this one obviously, if we did reach the 875 bottom that we've seen before. If you bought this in October, this could be the right time to be selling at a decent profit right now. That's a nice little 4-month uptick in Fullerenes. Next up, we've got hypersynaptic fibers. Bouncing off of that, let's say 11,500, I think, yeah, even 700 here. So it's the same situation, 12,000 for the sellers, 11,500 for the buyers. Do you want to risk that already? Personally, no, I think we can go lower. Nanotransmitters, bit of a bump up to 5,500. That's very close to its average price again. So perhaps if you bought here for 4,500, you can try to sell. But other than that, I would not touch it. Phenolic composites, that's a nice dive. That's what we want to see. Look at that, going for 2,000 ISK on the daily average. Bars at 1852, that's what we want to see. 2,000 for the sellers, 1850 for the buyers. Buyers well below the chart. This is your buy opportunity, guys, in the advanced move materials. Finally, here it is, phenolic composites. After a bit of research to 2,500. something broke the camel's back. We've got too much supply here. That is where I would put down my buy order. I think I'm gonna try that, maybe even like 1900 or something like that. Considering this chart, that feels like a great price to grab some of these. Next up, we've got the ceramic fibers. That unfortunately is not at the 400 bottom. It is under pressure though. So where are those buyers at 429? It's one to keep an eye out for, because basically last week phenolic composites, if that had any momentum, which it does, looks really good. Now on the ceramic fibers, if this has any more momentum, we could reach that 400 price point again. If you see buyers drop below that, still have a way to go, but if you do, then obviously a great time to move on that as well. But yeah, we have an obvious buy opportunity here in phenolic composites. That is a trade that I think you could make. You need some patience again. Look at the slow upturn here, but look at where the buyers are at, 1852. If we try to get anywhere close that 1852, that's below here on the chart. So yeah, that is definitely a pretty pronounced 1 year low point and a nice buy opportunity. Next up, we have the Tech 2 ships at 3020. Let's go over these, and well, with those pressures and those below average prices, I'm actually surprised to see the Aries surge up to more than 30 million ISK here. 31 for the sellers, 26 still for the buyers. So it's definitely a seller's market that all of a sudden decided to show up here and dictate the price for the Aries. You can still grab some cheap ones if you're lucky on the buyer side of things, but those might be forced up if this has any staying power. The Basilisk was at a 1 year low point as well, bit of an increased volumes back to 250. So here, yeah, 255 for the sellers, 211 for the buyers. That's still pretty damn low, 211, but we clearly see that the sellers market is back a little bit in the Tech 2 ships so far, and that is going to be trickier to grab these cheap Tech 2 ships now compared to last week. Cerberus flat just below 250. That's around an average price. Buyers at 226, decently cheap, but nowhere near the bottom. Then we've got the Crow again surging up here in price up to 35 million ISK. It's the buyers, the sellers, sorry, that are at 34.4 million. The buyers are still at less than 28 million ISK. So this is really somehow the sellers going up in price and winning out on all of a sudden people willing to pay those prices. Thus those averages shoot up with that wide margin. The Guardian was, I think, pretty low as well. Now 230 is staying there. Yeah, we'd want to see another bottom like that before we make a move. The Heretic though, that is very close to 1 year low point, and the buyers at 59 million. Yeah. Do I have one of these? Let's take a quick look at that. No, I don't. That I would say is obviously also a buy opportunity. Heretic 1 year low point. If you look at what's happening in the other ones, set to surge perhaps if the sellers decide that they want to dictate the price yet again. And now your opportunity, if you're lucky, to still grab a Heretic for less than 60 million ISK. I don't think that can be a bad purchase. The Hound next, still under pressure, not at the bottom just yet, but look at that data point. That is pretty damn low. 28.6 for the sellers and 27 million for the buyers. Still well below 30 million. Not as good as a 25 million purchase, but it's still pretty low or below average, I would say. Ishtar also bouncing up from a 1 year low point here. Let's take a look at the buyers, right? 226 for the buyers, 236 for the sellers. Feels like the buyers have been forced up a little bit here for the Ishtar. The Manticore, same little bump up and flat above 30 million ISK. So those buyers are slowly being forced up. I think we had a buy opportunity here where we could have easily bought these for 28 and even less than 28 million ISK. And now buyers forced up to 29 million. So the sellers, I feel like they are trying to get a grips on the Tech 2 ship market here, trying to get that under control so that they don't sell too cheap. The Munin also little bit of a comeback here up to 250, and buyers are close to 235, forced up a little bit. I think that's basically what's going to start happening in the Aries, in the Basilisk as well, that eventually those buyers are slowly going to be forced up. So we had the Munin. Next up we've got the Oneros. Again, same thing, right? 1 year low point 160. The buyers here are still at 147, but the sellers are back up to 208, and if they have the patience, they can force those buyers back up in price. Purifiers, also nice little uptick to more than 30 million ISK. Sellers, lots of them coming back in here, 29.5. Buyers though, first one forced up to 28.5 million. Lack of buyers though, that is kind of weird, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 buyers, that is it. So potentially, of course, you can still grab some cheap purifiers. The Saber, again, same pattern here, right? We had a nice little time at 70 million and lower, so we could have tried to grab some cheap Sabers. I was really aggressive. I tried to, I think, buy one for less than 65 million to have that absolute certain profit out of that trade. That never triggered, and now look at that, selling for 75 million, and the buyers already forced up to 70.5 million. Scimitar though, 1 year low points. Where are those buyers? Sellers at 205, lack of buyers 190. Another buy opportunity just because of the lack of demand right here for the Scimitar. Don't buy 100 of them, but 1 or 2, I think that would make a lot of sense. And then the Stiletto, same thing. Last month we had that resurgence, and now flat at 30 million, with sellers dictating the price and buyers forced up closer to their price here in Take-Two market. So a couple of very priced opportunities. Look at that Scimitar, and what was the other one that I spotted? Look at that Heretic. Not the usual trades. I would prefer honestly to be able to grab a couple of frigates or something like that. Those tend to move a bit quicker as well, but these are obviously at 1 year low points with a serious lack serious lack of demand. And oops, sorry, here the Scimitar, and these are opportunities to still try to grab some on the cheap. Doesn't always work out, of course. I tried to do the same with the Saber and failed, but here we do have some opportunities. Next up, the Tech 3 market at 36 minutes. Like that. Let's take a look at those destroyers again that, well, were flat at, well, close to 40 million is here. Confessor flat at around 38, I'm presuming. Yeah, 38 million for the sellers, 36 for the buyers. And here it's really the volumes, I think, that are important. Couple of sell orders, one with 22, but nothing crazy here. So this does feel like this is the price range that we are set to stay at, unless all of a sudden something happens in Nalsic. And then I think it only has upwards momentum, but that great trade which we could have had during the oversupply period here in October and before the summer, where you could have grabbed these for 30 million, that opportunity is obviously over for now. 40 million as well for the Hecate, a little bit of a weird data point at 45 million even. Yep, sellers up to 45 million, 30 to 40 million even for the buyers. And here the availability, it's not that great. Last 24 hours, only 2 sell orders, and the volumes, they're a bit higher than on the Confessor on average, but there's also fewer of them. So here you have that same problem that we can't go lower because there's not that much supply. There's enough supply for the market to have a 40 million price average, which I think is reasonable as well. Jackdaw, same thing, 40 million right here. Availability, it's decent. It's also, I think, the most popular tactical destroyer here. Missiles, always super popular. So here 23, 35, but that's it in the last 24 hours. And then you've got 19, 20, but nothing too crazy. This is doable, stable, 40 million for your tactical destroyer. And then we've got this Vapel, which I think is a little bit less popular, but still managed to get up to 40 million on 13, 12, 33. Nothing too crazy, 40 million. That is the price right now. And I would say that's around an average normal price in a normal market. Could start to swing either way on either nullsec activity, where they start to lose those fleets, need to replace them, higher prices, or you know, more supply coming in, and then we would need to see those numbers shoot up quite a lot, and then we might actually see a buy opportunity. For the cruisers, it's always a little bit more tricky to see exactly what's happening here. So the Legion is pretty flat, 173 million for the sellers. Availability, that's 1 of 46. doesn't feel like it's that crazy, so this feels like a normal price for the Legion, I would say. The Loki is slightly under pressure, heading for 200 million ISK on, well, 66.44, a bit more production, but still, this is nowhere near the 300-400 that we've seen before on much lower prices, like it did here in October as well, so this doesn't feel too crazy. Then we've got the Proteus, pretty much flat at 180 as well, or 170 actually, 170 for the sellers, and here we get 143, but other than that, pretty small volumes. And then finally the Tengu, that did go up to more than 200 million ISK, has to give back a little bit of that price range on not too much here, 183 for the sellers, 173 for the buyers, basically a lack of demand, 10, 32, 10, all of this is quite average, a decently supplied market, nothing too crazy. And then from time to time, as a result, of course, on some increased demand from whatever it could be, an event from CCP, one fleet lost, a fleet made, anything like that, could surge up the price, and a bit of extra supply can actually crash that price back down. So the Tech 3 market feels average, but also pretty healthy, something that if you especially use those ships, you're in a pretty good spot to actually buy and use them. So that's it for the general products. Next up, we've got the extra products, and last week we took a look at the faction frigates and we couldn't see the faction warfare trends in them so well, so we're gonna go the exact opposite. We're gonna go for the battleships, faction battleships at 40 minutes. Like that, to see if on these bigger ships we do have a bit more of an idea of what's happening in faction warfare and the impact on, especially of course, the faction battleships here. So we're gonna start with the pirate factions just to get a feel of what's happening here. For instance, the Barghest, obviously above average, climbed up to 1 billion ISK just before the new year here, now still selling for 958 million, very expensive. Buyers are a bit lower, but look at the availability. You're not gonna grab a lot of Barghest from the buy orders, I don't think. So definitely an above average price for the Barghest. The Macarial is at a 1-year low though, that one is continuing to crash. I think the Imperium is in the right spot to farm that stuff. That's my guess. I'm not 100% sure, but it's obviously you can farm the BBCs in nullsec, and if you get a stable, highly populated region, you're gonna produce a lot of them. So the Macarial, 389 million is for the sellers, 370 for the buyers. Pretty close to 1-year low point. We come from a massive dip here, a dip to the 1-year low point, bit of resurgence, but the trend is obvious, down for a full year. The Nestor is spiked up here to an above average price, and now he's back on average, I would call it. 395 to 396 million for the sellers, 371 for the buyers. Availability is decent, so this is an average price, I would say. The Nightmare, ooh, that's also 1-year low point, and that one I find very interesting here. Buyers at 420, sellers at 381. You're buying Nightmares for less than 400 million ISK below the entire chart, and look at the full 1 year here. Potentially, this could be an interesting buy as well. The Balgorn, same story here, 1-year low point at 230. 230 for the sellers, 214 for the buyers. Lack of demand is quite obvious. 1-year low point, man. Look at the Barghest chart, completely the opposite of the Nightmare and the Barghest, and the Macarial as well. But that one has been basically down for a straight year. Here we've had a decent year, and then we're back where we started the year from, so that's very interesting. Rattlesnake, below average, pretty low actually at the moment as well. 449 million for the sellers, 422 for the buyers. And then the Vindicator, ooh, that's also a crash. Are you buying Vindicators for less than 400 million ISK? That is very, very cheap. I think that this is also telling the story that nullsec at the moment, sure, there are some rumblings, but I think it's mostly, if I look at it from my Care Bear perspective, there are some wars happening, but it's mostly just, breaking some smaller entities, and then eventually you have, that group joined that massive coalition, that group went with that one, and you're basically just pacifying slowly the whole of nullsec, and as a result, most of these ships are actually really low in price at the moment. Now, next, Navy faction battleships. Let's take a look at that. Apocalypse Navy issue, flat at 430, which is in between the entire chart. So I would say that that would indicate an average or a pretty middle of the ground situation for faction warfare as well, between Minmatar and Amar, if that holds out. And we should see the same in the Minmatar battleships. And this one went down a little bit in the last month or so. So let's see if we have the exact opposite for the Minmatar ones. Here we have same story here, right? High peaks 550 almost, low points 350. We are currently selling for 440, buyers at 365, slightly above average, but not too far from it. And then I'm actually going to take a look at the Tempest and the Typhoon, which is, no, not great. 1 year low point, super available. Look at that, 274 for a Tempest fleet issue, 201 million for the buyers. And then we've got the Typhoon fleet issue, also very close to 1 year low point. 397 million and 366 for the sellers, for the buyers, excuse me. So this one feels well below average, and then here the Apocalypse Navy issue and the Armageddon Navy issue a bit above average, but actually going down in price. So this is kind of crazy, and it puts the theory of the very strong link here between faction warfare and the price of these Navy ships into, well, a little bit of turmoil. This doesn't make a lot of sense to see the Tempest also under pressure, and to also see the Apocalypse Navy issue here and the Armageddon Navy issue going down in the last couple of months. What's happening there? Well, one theory that would come to mind for me, sorry to say, it would be bots, right? Somehow we've got not a lot of actual battles happening between Amar and Minmatar, but just, you know, a settling down and maybe even a botting up of the activities to get all of that LP to keep both prices going down, which is kind of crazy. Now let's take a look at Dominic's Megatron, Raven and Scorpion. Here we're talking Galente and Caldari. Is the situation different here? We obviously have the Dominic's Navy issue at a 1 year low point, which should indicate a very strong Galente situation. 370 for the sellers, 310 for the buyers. If you're looking to buy, this is obviously the time to do so. Megatron Navy issue, not as pronounced, but pretty obvious that you could have 400 to 500 million ISK, and now we are selling for 370, bars at 301 million ISK. Very, very cheap. Looks like that is, you know, should indicate a very high price actually for the Raven. And here it does work out like that. You have the Raven Navy issue, for instance, that just a couple weeks ago was above 550 million ISK. It's coming back down a little bit, 523 for the sellers, 482 for the buyers, but we're obviously still well above average. And then we've got the Scorpion Navy issue that is just a touch above average, but not by too much. So here 535 for the sellers, 486 for the buyers. So yeah, bit of a surprise here. Honestly, if you look at the Dominic's Navy issue, for instance, that's obviously a pretty low burn though. So you don't have that like 6 month we're going down because Galente is winning out or anything like that. But we're obviously at a 1 year low point. If you're looking to buy any of these ships, I would look into either the Dominic's Navy issue or some of those cheap pirate factions. Yeah, still not a clear picture exactly what's happening with these Navy faction ships at the moment and what's happening in faction warfare. Any information put down below would definitely be very welcome. And I think next week, get little choice, we're gonna take a look at the cruisers and see if we can make any sense of that. But that's gonna be it for this EVE Talk, guys. Thank you very much for watching, and as always, I'll see you next time.